A reading from the Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O God.
When Jesus heard that John had been arrested, he withdrew to Galilee. He left Nazareth and went to live at Capernaum by the sea, in the region of Zebulun and Naphtali, that what had been said through Isaiah the prophet might be fulfilled. Land of Zebulun and land of Naphtali, the way to the sea beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who sit in darkness have seen a great light. On those dwelling in a land overshadowed by death, light has arisen. From that time on, Jesus began to preach and say, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." As he was walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who's called Peter, and his brother Andrew, casting a net into the sea. They were fishermen. He said to them, "Come after me, and I will make you fishers of men." Once they left their nets and followed him. He walked along from there and saw two other brothers, James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, mending their nets. He called them, and immediately they left their boat and their father and followed him. He went around all of Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, and curing every disease and illness among the people. This is the good news about our brother Jesus.
Praise to you, Jesus the Christ.
Have a seat. That's a joke. You're sitting, right? So, I recently attended the funeral of a friend of ours from St. Patrick. Chris was there. Some of you were as well. And I heard the story of how this Indian child, now an adult woman, joined and became a beloved member of her American adopted family. And I came to realize how extreme poverty can lead someone, in this case, a small child, to cling to hope. Hope, even in a stranger from the US, someone who appears to have resources, access to food and water and shelter. And from that, a bond of love was forged. There are competing narratives about Andrew, Peter, James, and John, and how they so easily put their nets down, and how they left their parents, their wives and children, their livelihoods, and their ways of supporting the ones that they loved, and followed this preacher man passing through their small town. Some say that they heard the call, that they knew God was calling them, and they recognized what they were being called to in Jesus. But we know enough about these men, especially Peter, to know that there was much that they didn't get, right? Even up until the resurrection, about who Jesus was and exactly what they were committing themselves to in following him. And we know that answering the call to become a disciple of Jesus doesn't necessarily mean leaving your job, leaving your family behind, though some are called that way. Most of us can serve God right where we are. Hollywood movies might portray Jesus as this magnetic figure who drew all people to himself, kind of turning into mindless zombies who blindly follow this good-looking man. And I saw an episode of the television version that we all like so much, The Chosen, that gave me a different perspective on what happened on the shores of Galilee that day. In season 1, episode 4 of The Chosen, Simon Peter is desperate to pay the taxes to the Roman officer Quintus. And so he goes out into the dark on the Sabbath, when fishing is prohibited, and he catches fish illegally to meet his debt. which is when he encounters Jesus, who says, "Come follow me." Jesus was in a region that is identified in our first reading and in our gospel reading as an area near the tribal lands of Zebulun and Naphtali. This war-torn region in northern Galilee was also squeezed between two occupying forces of Rome and Syria. They were a people sitting in darkness, the pole of oppression on their shoulders and the rod of their taskmaster. Now, Jesus, he could have returned to Nazareth at the time of the arrest of John the Baptist. Perhaps he would have felt, safer in that community, that little village of 200 to 400 people, most of whom he knew. Jesus could have sought shelter with relatives, for instance. Instead, he found himself in a fishing village that served as a Roman military center, the modest 13-acre area that was compact and bustling, with estimates of up to 3,000 residents, working poor, who owed much of what they earned to the Romans or the Syrians, depending on who they were occupied by at the time. It is said that 70 to 90% of those in Roman occupied territories lived at or below the poverty level. Rome asserted control over the land and the sea, their production and the transportation and marketing of their yields, with contracts and taxes. Jesus disrupted these men's lives and called them to a different kind of loyalty, a different way of life, to create a new community and give them a new mission. His summons exhibited God's empire at work, this light shining in the darkness of the Roman-ruled Galilee, occupying forces. That's a concept I never imagined I would become as familiar with in my lifetime. But it is the constant threat of our current president against many who have been our allies in the past. We want their precious minerals, their oil, their geographic advantages, and our own increased sense of regional power. In Davos, Switzerland, at the World Economic Forum, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney delivered what I suspect will be viewed as an era-defining speech. He began, "Today I'll talk about the rupture in the world order, the end of a nice story, and the beginning of a brutal reality, where geopolitics among the great powers is not subject to any constraints. But I also submit to you that other countries, particularly middle powers like Canada, are not powerless. They have the capacity to build a new order that embodies our values, like respect for human rights, sustainable development, solidarity, sovereignty, and the territorial integrity of states. The power of the less powerful begins with honesty," he says. Honesty that the rules-based order is fading, that the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. This contemporary assessment of Prime Minister Carney describes the lives of the people in the regions of northern Galilee, of Zebulun and Naphtali. The strong did what they could, and the weak suffered what they must. It describes the lives of these fishermen out on the Sabbath, trying desperately to meet their quota for the Roman Empire. And along came Jesus, who promised a different way. Prime Minister Carney said, "We have the capacity to build a new order." Jesus said, "Let's do it differently, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And so they dropped their nets from their weary hands, just like the small child in the rubble of poverty in India who followed this white couple home, seeing light of hope. They went with Jesus. Hunger, fatigue, and desperation does that to a person. It leads a Mayan mother to wrap her baby in a rebozo and carry him across the desert to a better life, or a boatload of Afghan nationals to cross the English Channel to seek asylum in Dover, or weary travelers from Somalia to adapt to the harshest winters of Minnesota in order to flee a bitter civil war, widespread violence, famine, economic insecurity, drought, and jihadist threats. It emboldens an aging man living on our streets, in our community, to accept an invitation to check into a shelter, or a runaway teen to accept the aid of a social worker, to provide respite, counseling, and a plan for returning home. Occupied countries like this region of Galilee often experience crumbling infrastructures. The effects of war wipe out or incapacitate schools, hospitals, financial institutions, and government offices. Food sources become scarce. Sanitation systems fail. People become sick and unsupported. Families are separated. The dead are left in mass graves. Like any good rabbi, Jesus sought out his students. Come, he said to the weary fishermen, much like he might say today to his neighbors in Palestine. Come, follow me. Let's care for these people. Together we'll cure the blind. We will help the lame to walk. We will heal the sick. We will embrace the lonely and abandoned and remove the stigma from those who've been cast aside. Let's create a new world order, one based on love and care for one another. Does it make sense now why they dropped their nets? They had no idea how it would happen. They simply knew how desperately they wanted it. And oh, don't we want it too? Jesus is calling. Will you go?